Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. I'd like to call this meeting to order, please. Barry. I'd like to call this meeting to order, please. Welcome to the Budget and Finance Committee meeting for August 14th, 2017. I'm Paul Krikorian, joined by my colleagues, Mr. Englander and Mr. Bonin, and we're ready to begin. First of all, are there any general public comment cards?
No, sir, there are not.
General public comment is closed. Are there any comment cards on any of our agenda items?
No, sir.
All public comment on all agenda items is closed. Members, I'd like to propose item 5 for consent approval, unless there's questions or objections. And Mr. Blumenfield is here as well. Any questions on number 5? If there are none, it will be the action of the committee to approve item 5 on consent. Members, we do have outside counsel here, so I think what I'd like to do is go ahead and see if we could finish our closed session items before we take up our regular agenda items. So let's go ahead and we'll move to the other room for closed session. So we'll begin with item number 1. All right. Thank you for your patience, everyone. We are back now in open session, and we can go ahead and take up item number 3.
Item number 3 is a motion relative to the transfer of the funding and responsibility for the basic car area boundary study included in the 2017-18 adopted budget from the Los Angeles Police Department to the City Administrative Officer.
Do we have anybody who's going to be reporting on this? Good afternoon. Mr. Bonin, do you want to start off the discussion?
Don't really have a lot of questions. Just as a way of context, this came up in this year's budget deliberations. Something the Budget Committee asked for was that we do an updated boundary study. Hasn't been one in a couple decades. Since then, some pretty radical changes in the population of Los Angeles in different places. I've got a whole new community in my district that didn't exist, Playa Vista. That is a huge jobs and commercial and growing residential center that didn't exist last time we did this. We've had some community area police stations that have opened since this that didn't get new senior lead officers. They just got pulled from elsewhere. The department, since the last time we've done this, has grown from fewer than 8,000 officers to about 10,000, but the number of senior leads hasn't increased. So ideally, this might be something we would do after every census, every 10 years or something, but haven't done it in 20 years, so asked for some money to be set aside, which it was. And so the report is recommending that we go ahead and kick off that process. I just wanted to add a couple suggested modifications or additions to the recommendations. One is to let the CAO evaluate as they look at this whether or not the proper mechanism is RFP or RFQ, to include the CLA as well as LAPD and CAO in the development of the RFP or Q, and to ask that there be, as part of the RFP or RFQ, a community outreach component with neighborhood councils, community police advisory boards. Once there's a draft, that they can comment on it, and there'll be community meetings around the city so folks can do so.
Okay, very good. Any questions? Mr. Englander?
Just a couple questions. First, thanks for bringing this forward and pushing through during budget deliberations. While I know this is a technical amendment on funds, having never been involved in this process, this is far before our time here, clearly. What is the process? Walk us through what this would entail, as well as a timeline as part 1. Part 2 is then obviously an approval process and implementation process. So if you could just sort of walk us through what we're looking at.
Tyler Munhall, CAO. So we've had one initial meeting with the CLA, CAO, and the police department to sort of start talking about what the process will be. And initially, we need to come up with an RFP or RFQ document, which we're thinking will take about 90 days, approximately. We have, our office has been looking at some work we did with the fire department that we might be able to use as a model for that RFP. That'll help us get through that a little faster. We need to look back at what has the historically been done in the past, some of the past studies, and so that potential bidders have access to that information. And then we need to decide on sort of what is the scope. Are we looking at what you can do with the existing resources and how you might want to reconfigure those given all of the changes that have occurred over the past 20 years? And or if you were able to add resources, where would those additional resources go? So we're going to be having a working group meeting to develop that document initially, and the public outreach we did discuss in that initial meeting will be very critical as well, and bring it back here before releasing it so that then you all have the opportunity to give that feedback. Does that answer your question?
Sort of. It does, although I'm not sure. I think that would either be duly referred or at least at the minimum go to Public Safety Committee. Not sort of a funding issue at that point. It's a scoping issue, but either way, I'm on both committees. So, but I think, having said that, though, how we tee it up in the scope is probably the most critical, because that's going to be the work product we're going to have to live with, that we're paying for. So, yes, having that come back, I would ask if we could, that we come up with options for our discussion, that if you could bring back to either committee, whichever most appropriate, but at least the options of what if we went down a road of, well, what would we do just based on the city's demographics and geographics and growth and all of the other subsets that we would look at. And then you mentioned another option based on what do we see our future needs at. There's probably more than two options. So I think looking at all options for discussion, because that scope is going to change, maybe even the cost, but it also makes sense to do it right the first time, I think. So if we could ask that. Then my question, my follow-up to that is, let's move down the path. So let's assume we've got a consultant on board and the plan's in place and done, and the study's ready. What then is the process for both approval and implementation? Clearly, there'll be some funding strings tied to it because we've grown. But what is the implementation plan? How does that? How does the approval process work, and then the implementation on that?
So once we have a study back, what would be the process?
Well, the study's back, and then what? Maybe the department can weigh in on that.
I think it depends largely on what, the results are on that. And I think we were talking about in this first meeting, although I wasn't a part of this, is what do we hope to accomplish out of the RFP? What is the crux of the issue? What is the question? Are we looking for more infrastructure in terms of more basic cars? Are we looking for more deployment? Are we looking at, different types? I mean, that's kind of the issue, I think, here that's going to be developed as we develop the RFP, to kind of ask what the question really is and what we hope to accomplish out of this RFP itself. But once we get that question, we can seek to answer that question and ultimately look at, do we want to add more officers? Do we want to add actually more basic cars, more slows? It's kind of different when you look at, the system that we have now, which is the patrol plan and how we ultimately deploy our resources, isn't based on that. It's based on workload. And so there's a whole lot of factors, the patrol plan factors. We could go into all of that, but the reality of this is, what do we hope to accomplish with the RFP? And I think once we get the question down, then ultimately we can move forward in terms of, what we hope to see at the end of this process and where we're going to go.
So I would ask, I think one of the pieces critical into an informed decision will be at least the narrative of where we're at today, because that's something that we don't know. The deployment plan, for example, we're not privy to how many cars are deployed in the basic car plan today per division, for example. I mean, even if we just studied what we have today, that information isn't shared from across the street on a regular basis with us. I'll be gentle on that. So to allow flexibility. So with that, though, I think it would be important to frame where we're at today, because it's hard to say, even once we go through this entire exercise, of what we'd want to change, not knowing exactly what we're funding in a patrol plan today. So I think that's important to bake into both the research and the report, if you will.
And I think Councilmember Englander, Mr. Bonin had asked, and had put forth a motion several months ago asking for all of this information, and ultimately the department's been working on this for several months. It's been completed. The chief has reviewed that, and I think it's ready to come across if it already hasn't. I've just gotten back from vacation, but it clearly identifies and addresses 17 of your issues, which are specifically related to exactly the questions, that you are asking today, that Mr. Bonnet has asked months ago, in terms of basic cars, officers, deployment, patrol plan factors, plus 14 other, issues, and where we're going to get these people and the like. So that's ready to come across the street, and I think it's any time to come back.
Public safety.
Yeah, I haven't been aware of that. I haven't seen it yet. So if it's ready, if you can forward a copy to my office so we can get it, I can review it and we can schedule it for public safety for discussion. That would be great.
Yeah.
Excellent. Good to hear. First I heard of it.
Certainly.
Excellent.
Certainly.
Excellent. Okay. That's all the questions I have.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else, members? Okay. Thanks very much. Without objection, it'll be the action of the committee to advance the motion and approve this item. As it was amended by Mr. Bonin, and Mr. Bonin, Mr. Englander's comments, I take it, were friendly as
Absolutely.
well. So as amended by the comments by Mr. Englander and Mr. Bonin. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That brings up item number 4.
Item number 4 is motion relative to funding for the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment in partnership with the Information Technology Agency and other city agencies to develop a mobile application, Connect LA, an inclusive civic engagement hub for Los Angeles.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Gracie Liu, General Manager with the Department of Empowerment. I'm happy to answer any questions we have on this motion. It was a motion that we asked Councilmember Huizar to introduce last fiscal year. We had set aside approximately $15,000 towards a pilot that would be an augmented reality civic engagement pilot that was going to be placed in downtown area. In essence, what we're trying to do is work with other city departments, planning, transportation, city clerk, cultural affairs were some of the folks that wanted to come on board. And it would basically allow them to have an app where you could look through, it would just notify you about different city projects. For instance, if there's a planning project, you could use the Augmented Reality app to potentially see what the planning future building will look like, and it could potentially ask you questions. Is this something that you'd like to be a part of? It could tell you city council meetings coming up, what neighborhood council you're in. It was something that we were looking forward to in terms of trying to have more engagement with our stakeholders. So this motion was to set that set up some of the funding for that pilot, so that we would have it when we are ready to execute on the contracts. And I have Assistant General Manager of ITA, Jean Holm, with me. She can kind of explain a little more about where this concept came from.
So this came out from, so Jean Holm, Assistant General Manager at ITA. This concept came out of a Google Innovation Lab that we held last summer around Angels Lab that really looked at some of the big city problems. We brought together 15 different city departments to look at some of these issues. One of the ideas that came out was this idea of sort of this gamification, a way to use augmented reality and new technologies to connect people who maybe traditionally aren't as connected as we want them to be with local government. And so the idea was if you're walking down a street, then you want to be able to understand what's the history of that piece of public art. What events are going to be here in Grand Park this weekend? What does it mean that there's a City Hall here? Like, what's the history of City Hall? Who works inside of City Hall? So the kinds of questions that you might have as you're just walking through the streets, we wanted people to be able to engage and understand and potentially kind of lure them into actually taking activities with city government. So this is a well-founded concept at other cities. We've seen gamification having really good inroads to be able to sort of increase voter turnout, increase civic engagement, increase connectivity with government. And we thought this would be a really great opportunity, working with a few different departments, to try to get this concept in place in a small way, test it out here in Los Angeles, see how it goes, and then be able to grow from there.
So that sounds interesting. It's unclear to me, though, since this is a multi-departmental effort, how does Dunn become in the middle of this? I mean, is Dunn project managing this?
Well, we're actually working with ITA. ITA is going to be the main lead on this. We were assisting with the civic engagement aspect of it in terms of us trying to identify new ways to engage Angelenos, not only with neighborhood councils, but in general. So we were hoping at this point, we had talked to ITA about whether or not they could hold the funds at that point, and they couldn't. So we were trying to create the fund, like a special account in order for us to preserve the 15 that we had set aside for this project, and to have the other departments place in their funding. So some of the other departments were willing to place in $5,000. We anticipate that the pilot's probably going to cost about $50,000. So some of the departments were going to place in some of their funds, and then whatever monies we didn't have, we were going to see if the mayor's innovation fund would fund that.
Okay. So you've anticipated my next question, which is there's lots of departments engaged. Clearly, this is not a $15,000 project. It's more than that. So there will be appropriations from other departmental budgets as well. And then, as everyone here knows, I'm not the technology guy here, but just from my layperson's hearing of your description of it, it sounds like the bulk of this work is not going to be so much in the app creation, but in the creation of the content and the maintenance of it, and figuring out where all this is going to be housed, and how it gets updated. I mean, there's a vast amount of information that is potentially retrievable through this app. That's all going to have to be. Somebody's going to have to take the job of making that current. So how would that work, and what would be the costs involved there?
Sure. So the idea is to start with some of the things that we already have on the Open Data Portal. So these are open data sets like cultural arts in public spaces, to be able to say what are the places that we want to be able to have these kinds of additional information come up. We have an events calendar that we manage through the lacity.org public webpage. So these are the kinds of things that we really just have to have on a technical basis an API or an application programming interface to. It's a relatively trivial aspect, and some of those data sets already have one. So we just pull that into this platform that is, there's several we've looked at already that are commercially available, and be able to then just add the content in. So the intent is not to have a lot of different content than things that we already have, but to take what we have as a city and be able to really leverage a lot more investment out of that.
Okay. I'll go to my colleagues first before I finish up. Why don't we start with Mr. Bonnet?
So, very interesting and intriguing idea. I think Mr. Krikorian nailed something, though, when he talked about the content. I have a couple examples of stuff. I have for years, literally since the late 90s, been urging the city to have a development conditions database. So someone can easily go to one portal and find out, is affordable housing required here? What are the traffic mitigations? Doesn't exist because it's been too complex to put together and get all the resources together from the various departments. We don't have a way someone can, to my knowledge anyway, scroll over a map of council district or community plan area and click on public work projects in that area to find out what's the timeline for this project, or who's the project manager, where can I get questions? We still, I know we say we do not have a multi-departmental coordination about road work. I know we say we do, but I have a handful of examples just from the past 60 days where Agency A was doing work on this major boulevard and the parallel major boulevard had another agency. I don't see how you get the info. I mean, you could have info about, you know, a sculpture or something like that that's static, but I don't see how you get the content there. I mean, we have a lot of content that we desperately need to pull together for a lot of great public engagement and information exchange purposes. But I'm just not sure how you get from A to Z on this.
Right, so I think, Council Member, you like hit the IT challenge nail on the head, which is we have a lot of disconnected data at the city that could be better connected so we could be a lot more effective and efficient. This project is not that. This project is taking the data we do have that is potentially of interest to the public and leveraging that data. So I am totally on your side with the idea that we want to connect all of those things. But in the sense that in a physical space of, say, around City Hall, that there are some really interesting things we know about that space and about things that are happening in the past and the future, that data we do have. And so it's really just leveraging that. And then potentially adding some additional content depending on what we hear back from the public. See how they play the game, where they drop off, what they stay at. This is kind of like a Pokemon Go where it's augmented reality, so you can kind of see something in the environment that maybe isn't actually physically in the environment. So even if we don't have a full database of all the city plans, if we have some city planning activities that can be visualized, then those would be the ones we'd want to show.
Yeah, I think it's cool. It's just for me, it seems a little odd to do something that is cool ahead of something where there's been a definite expression of public interest in having a sort of technology interface to share info.
Mr. Englander. I am a self-proclaimed techie, so
Everybody is here but me.
yes. I love this stuff, and first of all, adding third-dimensional augmented reality is not here yet, but it's coming fast. And as I think the biggest expression we saw of that is what was the Pokemon game, right? That you hold your phone over and all of a sudden characters appear. Beyond that, there is not an application or a phone that supports it yet. Apple's actually working on it in their next update, and they'll be the first. And they're actually partnering, and Google's going to have some applications that'll do just this, is what they're talking about, where you go into a city, either as a resident or a visitor, and you hold it over a park, and it'll tell you what activities are coming up, and they're going to pull in from our open portals, because that information is out there in different databases, and we do share it publicly, but you're right, there's not an API for it yet. To me, I think Mike hit the nail on the head. I mean, we've got so many needs right now of core functions, beyond just technological core functions, that we're struggling to fund. As an example, the computers in the police stations for the police officers don't work. Take an hour for an officer per shift to log in because we need new ones. And $50,000 may not seem that much in the scheme of the city, but it is. And it's not. It's only the beginning, because then it's going to require, maintenance and updates and refreshes and working out bugs. And we've all seen where that goes. I think DWP can share their best practices with us, but so to me, it's while it's only asking for 15,000 as a beginning and seed, and looking into the innovation fund and other things, I think there's a lot of other technology needs that we're just desperate for. We're way behind in customer service friendliness. The fact that, in fact, I'm working on a motion that I hope to introduce this week. We're almost done with it. So I'll tease it here and now for the first time, and looking for partners and sponsors on it. But it'll be one city, one login. And the whole idea is that you log in as a resident with one login where you have your own customizable either homepage and or dashboard, where from there you can program what you want to see and when you want to see it. For example, you can log in as your one username and password, just like you would your financial institution, and you see all your accounts. You would log into the city where you can see your DWP bill. You can sign up for neighborhood council agendas that are pushed to you, or council file numbers that you're tracking. You can look at your renew your animal license. Right now, if you've got 3 animals, you have 3 different logins with 3 different people numbers and 3 different animal numbers. This would be able to store then your payment information where you can pay anything online. One portal, one login. I can see this branching off from that but fill out a police report online, bringing in all your resources under one login, one password, just like you do, with everything else in the world except for the city of LA or government. I mean, we're cutting edge 1984. So that's something I'm looking at as one city, one login. This is great, and that being a priority of core city functions first, not something like this. This is great, and I think it's important, and maybe there's some other cultural funds or things that are very restricted that could be used and steered towards this. I'm begging IT to work with PD and doing an inventory of what are our basic needs and technology to keep the police department running. Our phone systems are falling apart. We're not sure what we're doing with updating our radio communication technology. There's ongoing discussions, but they want $60 to $80 million for that right now, which we haven't funded. There's a lot of other needs. And so I just can't be there yet on this. I think looking at the private sector and where they're coming in, particularly Google is really working on looking at Los Angeles, from my understanding, on augmented reality to do exactly what you're talking about. And with the new Apple interface, that's going to support that platform. It's a great marriage for what's going to be happening out there. I hope everybody from Android's listening and they get on the bandwagon with this. But that's where I'm at. And so I'd have to say for now I'm out, but I'm very interested in it.
It's not Shark Tank.
Oh, it's not Shark Tank. Okay. So maybe you could find one of the other Sharks.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Great, no, thanks. And I want to echo sort of everything I'm hearing from my colleague. I mean, I love the idea. It reminds me in some ways, Discovery Agent, if you play that game, which is in our different parks, they have it at Hanson Dam with the Discovery Cube, but there are different parks all around the country, and it's a private organization that sets up augmented reality in parks so that kids can explore a park and a little character will pop up and discuss something. Great stuff. Would love to see that for the city. But I also think there's opportunities for us to partner with some private sector folks who would want to do that, and to maybe they would be able to fund it a little bit better as well, and ultimately connect it to the 311 system, because that's we talk about our pet needs for more funding. We've taken our 311 system and we've made it great. We've put it on some steroids and it's gotten it's a lot better, but ultimately that's where we need to focus on services and getting those services to be as user-friendly and pushing the city into the palm of your hand. I mean, that is one of my goals, and I think it's all of our goals as a city. We want services to be right here. So I like the idea. Everything you're talking about is you're singing my song, but I would like to hear more about. I've heard a lot, which say a lot over the map, augmented reality, but civic engagement, gamification. I mean, all of which I could see in different ways, but maybe there's a way to get the department to come back and give us a better sense of what the scope is of what you're really looking at, because I'm not sure what we're buying at this point, so to speak. 15,000, small amount, but it's leveraging all these other departments.
I'd like to see more of an outline of what we're actually, not just all the possibilities of things that we're getting, but what are we spending our money on? How does it connect to 311 as we move forward? Because it's a great concept. I mean, who wouldn't want the city to be more user-friendly and gamified and having, I mean, we can all imagine, my future LA, I mean, there's dashboards on every service. You can find out, there's one portal, there's gamification with things that we walk on, but it has to all be integrated. I worry about starting up too many little things here and there that are not all integrated into our core 311 system.
So could I just
Yeah,
respond?
go right ahead.
So I do oversee 311 operations. We originally wanted to actually build it into the MyLA 311 app. The architecture of that app, though, unfortunately isn't architected in a way that's going to make this happen. So just because it's underlying content management system and service request system, and so there's no way to sort of have this kind of gamification piece in it. But what we did look at, and we also worked with Michael Scholl over at Rec and Parks to look at discovery agents. We've had many meetings with them as one of the potential platforms here, for example. So they may actually be part of this conversation. We're just trying to see what would make most sense. With any of those, though, there is a way potentially of taking some of the platforms we've looked at and connecting it back into 311. So if you are out looking at something and you see something that's broken or you want to change or you want to report on, then there would be a way in some of these platforms to be able to make that connection back into 311.
I think that would be important. Mm-hmm. Now, in the discovery agent, they don't use. We didn't set up that platform. That's their own platform.
Right.
So why wouldn't we do something? I mean, why would this require its own?
So we're just buying a commercial. The idea is just to buy, essentially, get access to a platform. So it could be discovery agents, where we would then build missions, is what they call them, missions for discovery, into that platform. If we use another product, it would be the same thing where we're essentially buying a platform, often hosted in the cloud, that we have to just decide what is it that we're trying to get people to do. Discover and explore Grand Park or City Hall, if we're trying to get them to show up at a neighborhood council or vote or whatever it is we're trying to ask them to do, what our outcome is that we're trying to measure with this, then we would want to make sure that we architect that content to drive that kind of behavior.
I will also say, too, that discovery agents is the age range is pretty much the kids to maybe teenagers. And we're looking at actually doing one for City Hall. Our Civic youth participants are going to be putting together one so that folks who come to City Hall can do a Discovery Agents game while they're here. The thing about the augmented reality app that we were looking at was exactly, as you were saying, Councilmember Blumenfeld, for me, what I was hoping that it ultimately would kind of the baby steps into like exploring what our city is about and then slowly adding in the different services, which is why all the other city departments who are interested in being part of this pilot wanted to be a part of the pilot. I left out Bureau of Engineering because they even have things where they shut down streets and they want to be able to tell folks why the street is shut down and have easy access to that. And that's what we hope that this app will get us to, which is slowly building, the inroad to having an augmented reality civic engagement app that would take people to the degree they're comfortable with in terms of participating with City Matters.
I mean, and maybe as you mentioned, this might be something for the Innovation Fund, to bring it up. But if I were speaking to you here as the Innovation Fund, I would probably say I want to see more of it spelled out. I mean, that's, on all of those, we generally have, we want metrics, we want to know from beginning to end, what's the call for question, what the money is going to be used for. And I guess I'd want to see that, whether it's Innovation Fund or coming through Budget Committee, those are still important questions that I don't see the answers readily in front of me, but they're certainly answerable questions. And maybe to come back on this question, I'm not ready to say I'm out as the shark, but I want to see more information and maybe a report back about what it would look like and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I'm going to make a recommendation along those lines. I think, Mr. Bloomfield, you said you articulated very well some of the additional information I think that we ought to examine. Mr. Englander, did you want to add something else?
Add one thing. Yeah, as long as you're going to be coming back to look at it, and when I say I'm out today for sure. But with that, to sell me on this is that three things. One, it's got to have a core function ability. And maybe that ties in not just 311, but 211. One of the things we struggle with, and we've had these conversations on 211, is there's no app to help people. And so a list of resources of what's available, whether those are homeless shelters, nonprofits, I mean, things that sort of go beyond the mildly interesting, but some ways to help people. I'd like to see the city only focus on, and if that app doesn't work that we have now for 311, then we should create one city app or one city. I don't want to see the city with 5 or 6 different apps. Yeah. I mean, one app, and that goes back to my one login portal, which is what, something like I said, I've been working on and we'll hope to introduce this week, but we should have one app and maybe working closely with ITA and figuring out, it can certainly take you in different locations, but if you can imagine, and I'll go back to the financial institution, if you had a different, not just a different login and password, but imagine you had a different app that you had to download for every product that you had. You had a savings account or checking account, or imagine you're a department store and you had a different app for home furnishings, a different app for menswear, a different app for children's clothing, different app for shoes. I mean, nobody would ever use it. And that's sort of the direction, unfortunately, government often goes in and working in silos. So while some of these features are good, I don't think a standalone on almost anything we should ever do is a standalone. And so I think abandoning the 311 app at some point and creating a user-friendly interface that has everything that Bob was talking about, Mike was talking about, where you can look at public works projects, you can know what streets are, and report a pothole or bulky item pickup, and then, oh yeah, what's happening at this park this Saturday? That would be cool. I mean, and I think that's far beyond, 15 or 50,000. But the usability and the user experience, the ability, the connectivity is so important. And if that's what we're striving for, I think that's what we got to think bigger. I'll just put that out there.
Thank you.
So I think I understand this a little bit better now, and thank you, colleagues, for the discussion, and thank you both for your report. It sounds to me, Gracie, this really doesn't involve neighborhood councils per se at all. This is an effort to more broadly engage the public in their city government. Is that fair to say?
It is. That's true, and part of it would be introducing neighborhood councils too, in terms of if you want to be involved further. And it is this, when we thought about this, it was ultimately to have like one app to rule all others type of situation, that we would just have one app for the city. And that's why we wanted to try this pilot that would basically hopefully take 2 blocks within downtown and just whatever the city in terms of services could put into that app to really showcase what an app such as this could do. That was the ultimate goal. And I understand, Councilmember Blumenfield, in terms of the scope of work, we started to talk to the other departments in terms of what they could, the services they would offer, or that could be offered on the app when we did the pilot. So we are definitely all on the same page in terms of not having multiple apps, having one app, and we were hoping that this might be the portal or the app that could do what we all hope will ultimately be one city app.
Okay. So, again, when I first saw the motion, for 7 years I've been trying to fight to keep done, on its lifeline of funding. And to spend money out of neighborhood empowerment to develop apps to meet when we can't, meet some of the basic functions that we need to meet for our neighborhood councils already, troubled me. It sounds to me now that you're just one of a number of departments that are all kind of participating in this. It doesn't trouble me, but that raises additional issues about the overall cost and benefit that we have to assess in this. So I think my colleagues have stated very well some of the additional things that we would really like to know and help shape and develop as we move forward in this. So I'd like to ask if, and members tell me if this meets your requests, I'd like to ask ITA to complete a detailed report to this committee outlining the purpose, development process, and long-term cost assessment for developing the constituent engagement app. And also indicate any legal requirements that need to be met for such an app, like ADA compliance, if it involves neighborhood councils, whether there are Brown Act issues that would be created by that, any of the other things like that that we would need to anticipate and ensure are met in the creation of this. So I think a report back to this committee.
Can I add one or two
Sure.
things?
Go
to that?
right ahead. Mm-hmm.
Clear scope of work, metrics for success and for failure. And if there's other examples from other jurisdictions of this kind of thing that we're looking at. So just to add as part of that report back.
And then, since Mr. England raised the point, since there seems to be commercially available, or at least this is being developed now within the private sector, some comparison between what we would develop on our own and what might be available off the shelf would be helpful as well.
I was going to say, this is very much like us trying to get a jump start on Google Streets or images, where they're already in the space doing it for free, and that's their next sort of rollout. Apple's announced the launch of this in their next device, and as I said, with that, I would go back to also, rather than spinning your wheels, it's going to be a lot of work, and it's a big report, and only to come here and face the same concern, questions, or issues, is I would suggest thinking bigger in some of the suggestions that I put out there, and looking at what are the most important functions for the businesses and residents in LA to access, and how can that connectivity be met. If we're looking at developing a new app where it's one city, one app, if that's possible, and I think at some point should be, rather than spending any money on developing different apps, I mean, that's taking over what we have in the space now, of thinking bigger and making this a real project. That's what I would ask.
Yeah, and I guess along those lines, rather than instructing the department to come back with a report, maybe it would be better to request such a report, because another option would be to simply pursue this through the ordinary budget process, as we normally would, with as part of ITA's budget, as part of Dunn's budget, and so on. This is something we're proposing, and then we would evaluate it as we normally do against all other priorities. I don't want to put you to the work of doing a big, complicated report if you could just roll that into what you're going to do in response to Mr. Englander's motion, for example, or what you would do or go to the Innovation Fund, or, in the ordinary budget process. But if it is something that, in your judgment, you want to really go for now, I think in order for us to get to the point of an appropriation, I think we would want to see some of these questions answered. So you just kind of have to decide whether it's worthwhile to do that much work for a report, or just do it in the ordinary course with some of the other things that we would normally be doing.
Great, thank you.
Anything else, members? Does that cover everything? Mm-hmm. Mr. Williams, did you get all of that flow of that conversation?
I believe so, but my question is this moving forward to council?
No, we'll hold this in the committee then, in anticipation of whether or not we would get a report back on those in response to those questions.
Okay.
Anything else? Okay, that will be the action of the committee. And is there any other business before the committee?
No, sir, that clears the desk.
All right, then we are adjourned. Thank you.